They sent me to Red Hollow because they thought I could handle the darkness. The assignment seemed routine at first. 7 missing persons in 3 months. All adults, all vanished without a trace from this forgotten mining town in northern Maine. What made it federal was the pattern. Each victim disappeared on the same night of the month, always during the new moon, always from the same district, always leaving behind nothing but a single crimson drop. My name is Detective Lana Cross, FBI criminal profiler, and I've been tracking dangerous individuals for 15 years. What my colleagues don't know is that I understand predators from the inside out. I've been living with a condition that makes me question where the line between hunter and hunted really lies. I arrived in Red Hollow on a Tuesday morning. The morning felt generous. The sun struggled through thick clouds that seemed permanently anchored above the town. Buildings looked like they'd been slowly surrendering to entropy for decades. Empty storefronts gaped like missing teeth in a weathered smile. The local sheriff, a weathered man named Bradley Kent, met me at the station. His confidence felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing this conversation. I noticed his pupils dilated slightly when he looked at me, a micro-expression that most people would miss. "Detective Cross," he said, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken history. "Glad the feds finally took interest, though I'm not sure what you'll find that we haven't already." I spread crime scene photos across his desk. Each location showed the same impossibility, a perfect circle of undisturbed dust or snow, with a single crimson drop in the center. No footprints leading in or out, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. "Sheriff Kent, I need to ask you something directly." I leaned forward, watching his reaction carefully. "Has anyone in this town ever mentioned the word order in connection with these disappearances?" His face drained of color. His breathing shifted almost imperceptibly. The change in his body language was like watching someone receive devastating news. "How did you?" He stopped himself, glancing at the closed door. "Detective, there are things about this town that don't make it into official reports, things that go back generations." That's when I knew I was in the right place. The kind of place where secrets have roots deeper than anyone imagines. The Red Hollow Historical Society occupied a Victorian mansion on Elm Street. Something about the building felt wrong. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, and my enhanced senses picked up chemical traces that shouldn't exist in a public building. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Cordelia Thorne, greeted me with a smile that seemed to hover just above her features rather than originating from within. "FBI," he said. She adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses with movements that were too precise, too calculated. "We don't get many federal visitors here." I showed her my badge and explained I was researching the town's history for a case. She led me through rooms filled with dusty displays and faded photographs, but it was the locked basement door that made my senses sharpen with interest. "What's down there?" I asked. "Storage," she said, but her pulse quickened in a way that suggested otherwise. "Nothing of interest to law enforcement." The physiological changes I'd developed over the years let me detect deception with unusual accuracy. More importantly, I could sense something else, something that made my own altered nature respond with recognition. After she left me alone with the archives, I spent hours reading through town records. Red Hollow had been experiencing mysterious disappearances for over a century. Always 7 people. Always during the new moon cycle. Always the same impossible pattern. The most disturbing discovery came in a leather-bound journal from 1893. The handwriting was urgent, desperate. "The Order of the Crimson Chalice has taken root in our town. They wear the faces of our neighbors, Our clergy, our leaders, they prey on us systematically. But they are clever. They take only what they need, when they need it. The sheriff knows. The mayor knows. Heaven help us. Even Father McKenna knows. The journal belonged to Thomas Whitmore, a mine foreman who had documented his suspicions about the town's elite. His final entry was dated October 31st, 1893. Why, I have seen them gather in the old mine shaft. I have seen what they do to the chosen ones. Tomorrow, I will expose them all. If something happens to me, know that the shadow cult lives beneath our feet. Thomas Whitmore was never seen again. The familiar sensation began in my chest, that tightness that told me I was close to something significant. My enhanced senses recognized the signs of an organized supernatural presence that had been operating in Red Hollow for over a century. The old Whitmore mine sat 3 miles outside town, a wound in the earth surrounded by rusted warning signs. According to the records, it had been sealed after a collapse in 1954, but the padlock on the gate was new, and there were fresh tire tracks in the mud. I waited until midnight to investigate. The darkness had become my ally years ago. When I'd first discovered that my condition came with certain advantages: enhanced night vision, heightened hearing, the ability to detect fear and deception through biological markers most people couldn't perceive. The mine shaft descended deeper than the town records indicated. Someone had been maintaining these tunnels. Electric lights ran along the walls, and the air carried chemical signatures that made my enhanced senses recoil. I descended for 20 minutes before I found the first chamber. It was a cathedral of stone and shadow, carved out of the living rock. Ancient symbols covered the walls, not Celtic or Christian, but something older and more purposeful. In the center of the chamber stood an altar. Dark stains covered its surface, and the metallic scent was overwhelming. But what caught my attention were the photographs arranged around the altar's base. 7 recent pictures. 7 faces I'd seen in the missing persons files. They weren't missing. They were gone. A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnels. Footsteps. Voices. I extinguished my flashlight and moved deeper into the shadows, letting my enhanced hearing guide me. The harvest is complete, a familiar voice said. Sheriff Kent, 7 more souls for the eternal feast. And the federal agent? This voice was older, more refined. She's been asking questions. Mrs. Thorne is handling her. The Historical Society has ways of dealing with curious investigators. My enhanced senses detected the shift in air pressure that indicated more people were approaching. They knew I was here. The Order has protected Red Hollow for over a century. The older voice continued. We will not let one government agent destroy what we have built. I began backing toward the tunnel entrance, but froze when I heard the next words. Besides, according to her file, Detective Cross has certain dietary requirements herself. She might be more useful than dangerous.
They knew about my condition. That meant they had access to classified federal files. Or they could sense what I was becoming.
I made it back to my hotel room, but rest was impossible. They knew about my condition. That meant they had resources I hadn't anticipated, or they possessed abilities that went beyond normal human perception. I'd been careful to hide my nature from the Bureau. Medical records that showed nothing unusual. A carefully constructed life that let me use my enhanced capabilities to track other dangerous individuals. But Red Hollow was different. This wasn't just a group of criminals. This was an organized network with connections reaching into law enforcement, local government, and who knew where else. Here I spent the night going through my files, looking for patterns I'd missed. The disappearances weren't random. Each victim had been chosen for a specific reason. Sarah Morrison, a social worker who'd been investigating neglect cases. David Chen, a journalist who'd been writing about municipal corruption. Elena Vasquez, a state health inspector who'd been asking questions about the town's water supply. They were all potential threats to the Order's secrecy. As dawn broke over Red Hollow, I made a decision. I couldn't wait for backup. I couldn't trust local law enforcement. I had to end this myself, even if it meant revealing capabilities I'd worked years to conceal. I prepared my equipment carefully. Special ammunition that I'd acquired through unconventional channels. Tools that most federal agents would never need. Then I drove back to the mine. The entrance was no longer guarded. They were expecting me. The tunnels were lit now, a path of electric bulbs leading deeper into the earth. I followed them, my enhanced senses alert to every subtle change in air pressure, every chemical trace, every shift in the electromagnetic field that indicated human presence. The main chamber had been transformed. What I'd thought was a simple altar was actually the centerpiece of a much larger complex. Stone steps led down to a vast underground cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadows. Dozens of figures in dark robes stood in concentric circles around the altar. At the center of it all stood Mrs. Cordelia Thorne, but she looked nothing like the elderly librarian I'd met. Her skin had a luminous quality. Her eyes held an inner light, and when she smiled, I could see that her dental structure had been surgically altered. "Detective Cross," she said, her voice echoing with unusual resonance. "Welcome to the true heart of Red Hollow." Sheriff Kent stood at her right side. His human facade finally dropped. His eyes held the same unnatural luminescence. "We've been waiting for you," Mrs. Thorne continued. "You see, we know exactly what you are. We can sense the changes in your physiology, feel the hunger that drives your enhanced abilities. You're one of us, whether you admit it or not." I kept my distance, but I could see at least 30 figures in the chamber. Even with my enhanced capabilities, I was significantly outnumbered.
"I'm nothing like you," I said. "I don't target innocent people."
Mrs. Thorne's laugh echoed strangely off the stone walls. "Innocent, detective, we are the shepherds of this community. We take only what we need, when we need it. We've maintained the balance in Red Hollow for over a century by eliminating 7 people every few months, by managing the population, by ensuring that our feeding grounds remain secure and our existence remains secret." She gestured to the robed figures around us. "Look at them, detective. Teachers, store owners, clergy, civil servants, pillars of the community. They've built lives here, raised families, contributed to society. All we ask in return is a small tithe." The horror of it hit me then. This wasn't just a cult, it was an entire shadow society. They'd turned Red Hollow into a human farm. "You're creating a sustainable ecosystem of predation," I said, understanding dawning. "We're survivors," Mrs. Thorne replied. "Just like you. The question is, will you join us, or will you force us to add you to our next harvest?" The robed figures began to move closer, their movements coordinated in a way that suggested extensive training. I could see their faces now, and I recognized several of them. The postmaster who directed me to the historical society, the diner owner who'd served me coffee, the hotel clerk who checked me in. They'd all been watching me since I arrived.
"You have 10 seconds to decide," Mrs. Thorne said. "Join the Order or become our next sacrifice."
I thought about the 7 missing people, about Thomas Whitmore, who tried to expose the truth over a century ago, about all the others who disappeared to keep Red Hollow's secret. Then I thought about the entity that had changed me 15 years ago, the encounter that had devastated my family before I managed to survive it, the condition that had made me something between human and something else entirely. I choose neither, I said, and acted. My enhanced speed caught them off guard. I moved faster than normal human reflexes could track, targeting the figures nearest the tunnel entrance. My specialized ammunition found its marks with precision that years of enhanced senses had made possible. Mrs. Thorne screamed as the first projectile struck her, the specialized metal causing her altered physiology to react violently. Sheriff Kent collapsed with the second shot, but there were too many of them. They overwhelmed me before I could maintain the advantage. Their enhanced strength matching my own abilities, I fought with everything I had, but within seconds, I was pinned to the altar, my weapons scattered across the stone floor.
"You disappointing detective," Mrs. Thorne gasped, the specialized ammunition still affecting her altered physiology. "I had hoped you would see reason."
She produced a curved blade from beneath her robes. The metal was stained with old residue. "Since you won't join us willingly, you'll serve us in another way. Your enhanced essence will strengthen the order, and your energy will nourish our young." The blade descended toward my heart. Pain exploded through my chest as the blade found its mark. But instead of weakness, I felt something else, something I hadn't experienced in 15 years. A hunger, not the controlled thirst I'd learned to manage, but the raw primal need that had consumed me in those first days after my transformation. The thing that had made me question my own humanity. My vision shifted, becoming sharper, more predatory. My senses expanded beyond normal human capability. The scent of fear filled my nostrils like a narcotic. The robed figures holding me stumbled back. As I rose from the altar, the blade fell from my chest, the wound already beginning to close. "Impossible," Mrs. Thorne whispered. "You're not one of us. You're something else." She was right. I wasn't like them in any traditional sense. I was something else, something created by trauma and necessity and the will to survive, something that had evolved to hunt their kind. I moved with speed that surprised even me. My first target was the figure nearest the tunnel entrance. I neutralized him before he could react. The sensation of draining his enhanced essence was like electricity and honey, awakening capabilities I'd kept suppressed for years. The others tried to flee, but I was faster. I was everything they were and more. I was their nightmare, given form. By the time the encounter ended, only Mrs. Thorne remained. She lay broken against the altar, her enhanced physiology failing, her immortal flesh wounded beyond her ability to heal. "What are you?" she gasped.
"I'm what you created," I replied. "I'm what happens when someone refuses to become what you are."
I knelt beside her, my enhanced strength easily overpowering her weakened state. "The Order," she whispered. "It's bigger than Red Hollow. We have chapters in 12 states. Stopping us won't end anything."
"Maybe not," I said, "but it'll send a message."
I applied pressure to a nerve cluster I'd learned about in my medical training, and her consciousness faded. The official report was carefully constructed. I discovered a cult operating in Red Hollow that had been responsible for the disappearances. During the arrest, cult members had attacked me, forcing me to defend myself. The cave-in that followed had buried much of the evidence, but I'd managed to rescue the 7 missing persons from a hidden chamber. It was largely fabrication, of course. The 7 victims had been gone for weeks, their lives claimed by the Order's rituals. The cult members had been neutralized when their enhanced physiology failed after their leader's defeat. But the story would satisfy the Bureau and the media. Red Hollow would be free of its parasites, and the families of the missing would have closure. I spent 3 days in the hospital, recovering from my injuries. The doctors marveled at my healing rate, but I attributed it to good genetics and physical conditioning. They had no idea what I really was. On my last night in Red Hollow, I walked through the empty streets. The town felt different now, cleaner. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over it like a shroud was gone, but I could still detect traces of the Order's influence in the historical society, in the sheriff's office, in the church where Father McKenna had once blessed their unholy communion. The cult was gone, but its influence would linger. It would take years for Red Hollow to truly heal from over a century of predation. As I packed my bags, I found a leather journal in my hotel room. Someone had left it for me. The handwriting was familiar. Detective Cross, if you're reading this, then you've done what I couldn't. You freed Red Hollow from the Order's grip. But Mrs. Thorne spoke the truth. There are other chapters, other towns, like this one. The Order of the Crimson Chalice has roots that run deep. I've spent decades tracking them, documenting their locations, their methods, their members. This journal contains everything I've learned. Use it wisely. The war is far from over, but at least now we have a weapon they didn't expect. Someone who can match their abilities without losing their humanity. Good hunting, Detective. The responsibility is yours now. The journal was signed with a name I recognized. Thomas Whitmore, the mine foreman who disappeared in 1893. Somehow, he'd survived. Somehow, he'd been fighting the Order for over a century. And now he was passing the torch to me. I spent the next month studying Whitmore's journal. It was filled with locations, names, dates, and detailed observations about Order operations across the country. Each entry was written in meticulous detail, documenting a war that had been fought in shadows for over a century. The Order of the Crimson Chalice had chapters in Vermont, New Hampshire, Oregon, Montana, and 8 other states. All small towns, all isolated communities where disappearances could be explained away as accidents or people simply moving on. Each chapter followed the same pattern. They'd infiltrate the local power structure, police, government, religious leaders. They'd establish themselves as pillars of the community, while secretly managing the population for their own purposes. They were intelligent. They were patient, they were organized, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was like them.
I wasn't.
I was something else entirely, a hybrid, someone created by trauma and necessity, shaped by years of hunting the supernatural. I had capabilities that matched theirs, but not their limitations. I could operate in daylight. I could enter consecrated ground. I could handle blessed metals without adverse effects. And most importantly, I could drain their enhanced essence without becoming what they were. The hunger that had terrified me for 15 years was actually a tool, a capability designed to neutralize the very creatures that had created the need for it. I submitted my report on Red Hollow and requested a transfer to the Bureau's X-Files division. Cases involving unexplained disappearances, ritual activities, and supernatural phenomena. Cases that other agents couldn't solve because they didn't understand what they were really hunting. The transfer was approved within a week. My new assignment came with a corner office and access to classified files that most agents never saw. Cases involving creatures that officially didn't exist. Phenomena that couldn't be explained by conventional investigative methods. I was given a partner, Agent Sarah Chen, a former Army intelligence officer who'd requested transfer after encountering something inhuman during a tour in Afghanistan. She didn't know what I was, but she understood that the world contained predators that wore human faces. Our first case together was in Millbrook, Vermont. 3 missing persons in 2 months, all taken during the new moon, all leaving behind a single crimson drop. The pattern was familiar, but something was different. We arrived in Millbrook on a Thursday afternoon. The town was smaller than Red Hollow, but instead of the oppressive atmosphere I'd expected, there was something else, a sense of anticipation, like the entire community was holding its breath. The local sheriff, a thin man named Roberts, greeted us at the station, but unlike Sheriff Kent, Roberts seemed genuinely relieved to see federal agents. FBI, he said, his voice carrying honest gratitude. Thank God you're here. We've been trying to handle this ourselves. But, he shook his head, we're in over our heads. This was already different from Red Hollow. The local law enforcement wasn't compromised. Sheriff Roberts, I said, watching his reactions carefully, I need to ask you something directly. Has anyone in this town ever mentioned an organization called the Order of the Crimson Chalice? Instead of fear, his face showed confusion. Never heard of them, but detective, there's something else. Something we didn't put in the federal request. He led us to a conference room where files were spread across a large table. The missing persons aren't from here, he said. They're outsiders, people who came to Millbrook specifically. We think they were recruited. Agent Shen leaned forward. Recruited by whom? That's what we're trying to figure out. But we found something at each scene, something that doesn't match your typical cult activity. He showed us photographs. Instead of the ritual circles I'd seen in Red Hollow, these crime scenes showed signs of struggle, broken furniture, torn clothing, evidence of people fighting back. Whatever took them, Roberts continued, they didn't go willingly, and they knew it was coming. The Millbrook investigation revealed something I hadn't expected. The Order of the Crimson Chalice wasn't operating here. Something else was. Something that was hunting Order members. The 3 missing persons weren't random victims. They were cultists from other chapters, people who'd been drawn to Millbrook by some kind of summons. They'd come here expecting to find a new feeding ground, but instead they'd found something that preyed on them. Agent Chen and I spent 3 days gathering intelligence. She handled the conventional investigative work, while I used my enhanced senses to track the supernatural elements. By the end of the week, we'd identified the pattern. Something was systematically luring Order members to Millbrook and eliminating them. The Crimson Drops weren't part of a ritual. They were calling cards, warnings to other supernatural entities that this territory was claimed. How do you want to handle this? Chen asked, as we prepared to investigate the town's old quarry, where the trail seemed to lead. Carefully, I replied, checking my specialized ammunition. We might not be dealing with cultists this time. We might be dealing with something that hunts them. The quarry was different from the mine in Red Hollow. Instead of elaborate chambers and ritual spaces, we found something that looked like a workshop, tools, and equipment that seemed designed for capturing and containing enhanced individuals. But it was the wall of photographs that made me understand what we were really dealing with. Hundreds of pictures, all Order members, all marked with red X's. Someone else had been hunting the Order of the Crimson Chalice for years. A sound echoed from the quarry's depths. Footsteps. But these weren't the coordinated movements of cultists. These were the careful, measured steps of someone who'd been expecting us. Detective Cross. A voice called from the shadows. I've been waiting for you. A figure emerged from the darkness, elderly but strong, with eyes that held the weight of decades. I recognized him immediately from the photograph in his journal. Thomas Whitmore, still alive after over a century.
You've been doing good work, he said, gesturing to the wall of photographs. But you're only seeing part of the picture. The order isn't just a cult, it's a symptom. There's something bigger behind it, something that's been using them to test human responses to supernatural predation.
Agent Shen stepped forward, her training keeping her focused, despite the impossibility of the situation. Mr. Whitmore, we need to understand what's happening here.
What's happening, he replied, is that Detective Cross has become what I never could. Someone who can match their abilities without losing their humanity. Someone who can fight them on their own terms.
He turned to me directly. The order was just the beginning. There are others, worse things. Things that make the cultists look like amateurs. What kind of things? I asked. The kind that have been watching your progress with great interest. He said, the kind that are about to make your life very complicated. Chapter 12, The Reckoning. The final confrontation didn't happen in Millbrook. It happened 3 days later, in a federal facility outside Washington, D.C. Agent Shen and I had been called in for debriefing, but instead of bureau officials, we found ourselves facing something else entirely. The conference room held 5 individuals who radiated the same enhanced presence I'd learned to recognize, but these weren't order members. They were something else, something older and more sophisticated. Detective Cross, the leader said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate at frequencies beyond normal human hearing. We represent an organization that has been monitoring your activities with great interest. Let me guess, I said. Another cult? Quite the opposite. We're the ones who've been fighting them for millennia. The Order of the Crimson Chalice was just one of many organizations we've been managing. Agent Shen's hand moved toward her weapon, but I touched her arm, stopping her. My enhanced senses told me that violence wouldn't be effective here. Managing how? I asked. By allowing them to operate within controlled parameters, by using them to identify and develop countermeasures, by ensuring that humanity's exposure to supernatural predation happens gradually, in ways that build resistance, rather than causing panic. You've been using people as bait, Chen said, her voice sharp with anger. We've been preventing a war, the leader replied. A war that would devastate both species. Detective Cross represents something new. Someone who can bridge the gap between human and enhanced individuals without losing their moral compass. What do you want from me? I asked. Partnership. The order was a test. You passed. Now we need you to help us deal with the real threats. The entities that make the cultists look like children playing with matches. He gestured to a wall screen that displayed a map of the United States. Red dots marked locations across the country. Hundreds of them. These are active supernatural threats that we've been containing. Werewolf packs, demon cults, vampire covens, entities that feed on human fear, human pain, human despair. We need someone who can deal with them directly. And if I refuse, then you continue your current work, and we continue ours. But the threats are escalating. The entities are getting bolder. Soon, individual agents won't be enough. We need someone who can coordinate a larger response. They're already teaching Shen. Then at the map, hundreds of red dots, hundreds of communities living in fear of things they couldn't understand.
I'll do it, I said, but I have conditions.
Name them. Agent Shen partners with me. Full disclosure on all operations, and we do this my way. No more using innocent people as bait. The leader smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. Agreed. Welcome to the real war. Detective Cross. Epilogue. The new beginning. 6 months later, I stood in a command center that officially didn't exist, watching displays that showed supernatural activity across North America. Agent Shen worked at a station nearby, coordinating with field teams that the public would never know existed. We'd neutralized 14 major threats since joining the organization: werewolf packs in the Pacific Northwest, demon cults in the Southwest, vampire covens in the Deep South. Each operation had been successful, each threat contained without public exposure, but the work was never ending. For every entity we neutralized, 2 more seemed to take its place. The supernatural world was vast and complex, filled with creatures that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries. The organization, they called themselves the Threshold Foundation, had resources I'd never imagined: technology that could detect supernatural activity, weapons that could neutralize enhanced individuals. Most importantly, a network of agents who'd been dealing with these threats for decades. But what made me valuable wasn't just my enhanced capabilities, it was my humanity, my ability to understand both sides of the supernatural equation, my experience as someone who'd been changed by these entities, but hadn't lost sight of what was worth protecting. Thomas Whitmore had been right. The war was far from over, but now, at least, it was being fought by people who understood what they were fighting for. I am Detective Lana Cross, and I hunt monsters, but I've learned that the real monsters aren't always the ones with fangs and claws. Sometimes they're the ones who use fear and desperation to turn ordinary people into predators. The responsibility is mine now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The truth is out there, and sometimes it's more complex than anyone can imagine. But complexity doesn't mean hopelessness. It just means we have to be smarter, stronger, and more determined than the things that hunt in the dark, because in the end, that's what separates us from them. We don't just survive. We protect others. We build something better. We refuse to let the darkness win. And that makes all the difference.